Doing. And the microphones went on. Excellent. I would like to welcome the community members in attendance this evening. As a reminder, governing board meetings are a business meeting of the board held in public, and although public participation is encouraged, it is not the public's meeting. It's the duty of the board president and or clerk of the board to maintain an orderly, respectful, I should repeat that, an orderly, respectful, and peaceful meeting where all perspectives, voices, and opinions are welcome. Please refrain from speaking over another person when that person has the floor. At the appropriate time on the agenda, individuals wishing to provide public comment on items appearing on the agenda will be called upon one at a time to do so in accordance with Board Bylaw 9323. The board cannot and will not respond to any non-agendized items, but a staff member will reach out to you on matters that may need to be reviewed as appropriate. Well, you might get a phone call or a message in the middle of the week, which would be cool on that. Okay, A2, roll call. Mrs. Lunn? Present.
Present.
Mr. Pardue?
Present.
Mrs. Vandergriff?
Present.
Ms. Young? We'll have the Pledge of Allegiance, and Mrs. Lunn will lead us. Please stand. I assume you've all, most all of you have seen the Olympics and are enthralled with people who can do things that we only can be amazed at. And it's interesting how many flags show up. So it shows that there are still good strains of patriotism alive in our young people, and it's fun to see them very proud of the American flag. Going to A4, this is a presentation on attendance boundary realignment process. Dr. Anders.
Part of the presentation I'm going to conduct from the podium, so I'm going to start there. Thank you. I had to make sure the microphone was on. So trustees and members of the public who are here with us today, glad to have you here. This was part of my job and responsibilities is to be keenly aware of the needs of our community as best as I possibly can with the information given to me by as many resources as I can gather. At the same time, I live both in the current moment and I live in moments which are years away. We have to be thinking about the future of our community and what it takes to get to that point from where we are now. And that's kind of what prompted my we'll just call them heart palpitations, as it were, about the need to begin this process as soon as possible and inform our community, even before the school year started, of where we need to go in order to be prepared for what is coming our direction. And so that was what prompted this meeting. And again, this is not a meeting, it's not an action meeting. There's nothing agendized. We have no recommendations. This is an informational study session for the board members. And members of our public get to participate either online or here in the audience. It's good to see our friends who are here from all facets who come to many board meetings. It's great to have you here. I want to share a thought before I jump into my slides, and that's this. What really unites all of us? Everyone in this room, every trustee, every member of my staff, our teachers, there are approximately 3,000 employees. I think most of our parents and our community members would think this makes a lot of sense. What really unites all of us? We want our students to have great experiences, really great learning experiences where they learn and grow with great adults. These are, and I toy with the idea of teachers because I love teachers. I'm married to a teacher, but there's more than teachers that influence our kids' lives. And so they've got coaches who may be a teacher or not a teacher. I think about the bus driver who smiles when they get on the bus, the folks who provide breakfast, our campus security, our administrators. All these great adults really have an impact on our students as well. And they need to happen in great spaces where the buildings are air conditioned or shaded or heated or cooled, where the technology works, where the furniture is not breaking, et cetera, et cetera. They need to happen in great spaces. And I don't know if anybody can argue with this one. I'll talk to somebody afterwards who might have an argument, but I think that we all are pretty much united on this sentiment. But I also know we all have different approaches to get to the same place. I think we agree upon that. And we may have to agree that we disagree, but I think we at least need to keep this as our common cause, and we need to let this value win out. And we may not get there at the same time, but I think we need to remain focused on what our students need and our parents are requesting of us. We as employees of a school district want to work in a place where we can do this for kids, and let this be what unites us, is how do we create great experiences with great adults in great spaces? And that's really where all these things come together within our community. Tonight's slide deck and presentation, which this again is a study session for board members. So as we go, there'll be opportunities for asking questions at the end of this. We also, as you all know and can tell, we move public comment to the end, not the beginning. We feel strongly that what will be presented may help answer some questions, may prompt new questions. So it gives our constituents time to think about that and present a card for a comment or something that we can clarify afterwards. Again, this is not a town hall meeting where we're just calling out. That's not what this is. We're talking about town hall meetings. There'll be opportunities for that in the near future. But in the moment, this is a study session for the trustees who are present tonight. So we're going to talk about a couple different topics, and then I'll jump into the first two that I'm going to do my best to cover for the board. And then the last part, our consultants from Woolpert and Mr. Darren Daniel, our deputy superintendent, will share with us about process. So a couple of things have come forward in recent board meetings and in social media and in questions to me, and they're worth just spending a few minutes on. What's the difference of a bond measure with only the majority of the board of 3 yes votes and a bond measure with 2/3 of the vote? Like, what is that Prop 39 all about? So we've got some good information from one of our trusted partners, the attorney firm from DWK has got some slides for us next. Why does Murrieta Valley Unified School District have so many interdistrict transfers? And how does the district manage them? Like, how do we deal with that? And then what's next for the district to accommodate the influx of residential housing that's coming to the district, which is kind of the big bulk of the question. The other ones are a little bit not necessarily as important as the last bullet point about where we need to be, how do we need to be prepared for the future. So we're going to jump into this. These slides, again, were provided by Meredith Johnson. She is an attorney with DWK. And this is just the difference between a Prop 39 and a traditional Prop 46 bond. All right. First of all, a Prop 39 bond takes 2/3 approval of a board. In our case, that's 4 out of 5. A traditional Prop 46 is only the majority of the board, so 3 out of 5. Okay, that's one of the differences. Next, the 2/3 voter approval. So Prop 39 is only 55% to pass a measure, whereas the traditional one was 2/3 of the voters need to pass a measure. So it was a much higher threshold. All right, sorry, I'm losing my place in my slides where my notes are. I apologize. Okay, next. Great. So again, the difference, again, Prop 39 allows for construction, reconstruction, rehabilitation, replacement of facilities. It also includes a unique feature that's not allowed in Prop 46, which is furnishing and equipment of schools. So it allows for furniture, computers, and so forth. The other one in the traditional method was no furniture. So districts would have had to use general fund money to acquire furniture. And so, for example, I was there today at Murrieta Elementary School, and Proposition Measure BB that was passed in the past is providing for furniture. And that is what was moved in today to the classrooms. Brand new classroom furniture for our students in the Murrieta Elementary School building. But Prop 46 doesn't allow for that. Prop 39 includes a bond oversight committee, a bond project list, as we've had lots of discussion about project lists and how they work, a citizens oversight committee, and annual financial and performance audits. The other method does not require any of that. So it's just kind of a blank check. And so those are one of the significant differences in why Prop 39 came into existence, was to have much more accountability than the traditional method. So also Prop 39 imposes some tax rate limits, You can only, at each bond, only tax up to $60 per $100,000 of assessed value. So there's a limit to that. Prop 46, there is no limit. So you can go much higher. And so Prop 39 is nice. There's some nice breaks, like tap the brake, like that's too much. There's nice limits in there so that the taxpayers there's more control that way. And so anyways, that's a difference. All right. So, we have some typo up there. I apologize for that. So kind of in summary, Prop 39 is pretty well understood. It's commonly favored by taxpayers because of the requirements and caps, the measures that are there, the accountability measures. Since the year 2000, we rarely see a Prop 46 measure. Actually, people we've talked to, our consultants, they know of very few districts who's even attempted one. But they are used when a district must exceed a cap that Prop 39 would limit them to. They're difficult to pass, obviously, because it takes a higher threshold. Our district polling did not suggest that we would pass such a measure. So when we were doing the feasibility study, the recommendation from our consultants and our pollster was to pursue the Prop 39 methodology. Okay. So hopefully that clears up some of those questions. Next is really the transfer process. Why do we have transfer processes? So I talked to my staff. I tried to come up with how do I describe all these kids that are coming to us, and how does enrollment work? And so we have a little graphic there to describe that. So the big green bucket is our district. Those are all the kids that come to us. Actually, we didn't add it, but there's a really small little pipe that comes out, and those are kids who leave our district. It's a small one. There's a few, but there are students who choose to leave Murrieta Valley to attend. Oftentimes, that is because their parents, like actually in the case of Miss Young, she'd probably tell you, but she worked in a different district and she wanted to have her kids on the same schedule. So they took her kids, they attended a different school district. That's pretty common. It makes a lot of sense. But there are some who leave us. But the pipe on the left is just filling. And those are new kiddos who are born, families who move into the neighborhood. In my absolute situation, we have a family moving into our home. They're kind of they're moving back to California. So it's 2 kids that just enrolled in the district this week that are just on the natural. And I completed all the appropriate paperwork as well to validate that they are living there. But they just come, and we have no control over any of that. They simply, by birth rate, by move-ins, and so on. The other one with the valve on top, that's our transfer process. We have a lot of control over the transfer process. And we'll talk about how and why that's used, a little bit about it. And so oftentimes, and what we did is actually back around about 20 years ago or so, when we had a lot of growth on the west side of Murrieta, and actually in the Winchester neighborhoods and so forth, and those other districts didn't have schools out there yet, there was a demand for people to enroll in Murrieta Valley schools. At the time, we were like, we need to fill some of these new buildings, and so we allowed for transfers. So we started to allow that transfer process to happen. During the recession, having a high enrollment rate helps to keep your budget very stable. And so we would allow transfers to occur. That also helped to stabilize our budget during the Great Recession. And all districts are always eager to take students in because it helps to maintain enrollment. Stable budgets also mean consistent staffing of schools. And so if you're constantly kind of up and down on a yo-yo, it's very difficult to keep programs stable, because teachers, like most people, want a stable employment. They don't want to be guessing, am I employed this year, next year, and so forth. And so families want the same. And so having a consistent amount of students in our district to the best ability of our best possible that we can allows for stable staffing, which also then means stable programs. Students, when they come to us, we receive dollars per student, and they're slightly different depending on the age and so forth. It's not a fixed dollar amount per student. And that's how we pay for programming. It's how we pay for certain programs. Because they pay for, when they come in, we collect all those resources together. And then, of course, it covers the cost of teachers and the administrators, but it's also all the rest of the team that comes along with them. And so how do we pay for all these different individuals? Again, about 80% or 85% of our budget goes to people. And a very small amount goes to things. And so maintaining a high quality arts program or athletics or the honors offerings. I think about the type of programs, the diverse and rich offerings we have at our middle and high schools are available because we have a very stable budget and it's the size that we have. We have resources, and as our CFO puts it very well, we can do anything. We just can't do everything. And so having a consistent budget with as best as possible, consistent enrollment allows us to continue to do the things that we're currently doing. If we were to shut that valve off right away, it would result in some pretty major layoffs. Because we'd have to trim approximately, this is just an estimate, in the neighborhood of $20 million. That's a lot of people. Question?
When we're talking about transfers, does that count in our population for non-duplicated, I think I'm saying this right? Unduplicated students in our population. When we talk about getting funded from the states, I know I've heard this come up a few
Sure.
times.
Yeah.
And that's a very important formula.
It is, yes. So good question to help distinguish that. When a transfer student comes into us and we have them as enrolled, however they arrive to us, we take the demographic information about those students and they do become part of our unduplicated count if they qualify as one of those indicators. So a transfer student, we'll just use for an example, a foster student who's now transferred into us, they would count as part of the unduplicated count. They would, okay? We don't necessarily go seeking or advertising for certain types of populations. We just allow people to apply to come to us. So, good question. All right, next. The types of, oh, yes. Microphone, please.
I know that we're a destination district for special needs students. How does that factor into our transfers?
That will be its own study session for the board.
Oh, okay. Retract.
No, let's talk about it briefly to
Okay.
understand it. Murrieta Valley Unified School District has over the years developed a terrific reputation of doing excellent work for families whose students have a disability of some kind. And I know a family specifically that moved in my neighborhood, and they moved here because they wanted their child in Antelope Hills Elementary School, and their child is a 3-year-old. Actually, when they moved, he was 2, and he has autism because they wanted to be in the district. Again, part of that pipe it fills. That wasn't a transfer. They just moved here. They're buying a house here because they want to be in the district. We have that reputation. We do a good job of that. In some ways, it has become a problem because we do such a good job. Families are applying to come here through the transfer process. We'll go through a process to determine if we have space or even able to accommodate their requests. Oftentimes we deny them because we don't. And sometimes those people will appeal to the county, then they will be assigned to us, and we don't have any control over that. Yes.
In those situations, because we're a draw and we're picking up, in this case, special education kids from other districts, does that help in funding from the state? Does the state make up for accommodating those students, especially if the needs are significant? Do we get more of anything?
It typically does not. It typically does not come with anything extra other than what their normal, the same money they'd be going to that district is coming to our district. And what we have found is, and this is again, another topic for another time, big deep dive into how special education funding works. We never, ever, and since the inception of IDEA at the federal level, has a district received full funding for the cost of educating students in special education. That's at the federal level,
Right.
and the state passes through the federal dollars to us. And so there is additional funding that comes for students with special needs, but we call it, all of us in this side of in this world over here of educators and professional educators, we call it encroachment, meaning the cost to take care of our students encroaches on the general fund beyond what they have generated in terms of revenue. And so transfer or no transfer, that's still a problem. And so it's a balance that all districts go through to provide appropriate and adequate services and still trying to maintain some sense of balance within a budget so we don't continue to encroach. And it is true, the more students with special needs that we have, the more encroachment on the general fund. But the whole process around special education transfers is worth its own discussion because now we're getting about to the limit of my ability to describe that.
Just FYI for everyone listening, in May, when we go out to Washington to advocate for funding through CSBA, when IDEA first came into play about 20 years ago, federal government said you have to provide all these services for special ed students, and they deserve all those services, absolutely. And they told us that they would fund us at 40%. They have never funded California more than 8%.
Yeah. So that's been a challenge since the inception of IDEA.
FYI.
Yeah, in special education is the federal government promised 40%. I think the highest they ever hit in the best budget years was like just under 20 or 8, some sort of number. It was never even close to 40. Whatever, or the number you quoted might be the right one, I think. It's been well less.
That was an additional responsibility. 20 years ago, that was an added responsibility of school districts across the state.
Actually, IDEA came in I want to say 1976. So it's when the federal law was passed. And again, I could be off on my date, but it's been some time.
It's been a while.
Yeah. Okay. Good questions around that, but it does come with that burden sometimes. Okay. Types of interdistrict transfers, and we're about to the ends of my slides here. The types that we have is, and these are ones, some of these are defined in ed code. Children of employees. I was talking to one of our new assistant principals who lives in Menifee, and she went through the transfer process to have her children leave that district to come to our district because she works here. And that helps, as we know, as parents, we want to have our kids close to where we work. So in case there's something we need to go do or drop off and so forth, we're close by. So those are allowed in the law and required in the law that we accommodate those. And so we, of course, we do. Other times we do approve transfers to students at available schools. Not all of our schools are available for transfer. For example, people who were put in transfers this year, because that window opens up in the fall, it closes in the early spring for the upcoming year. Early this fall, around the month of January or February, we put notice on our district webpage that Lisa J. Males, Alta Murrieta, Thompson, and which one? Murrieta Elementary School and Cole Canyon. Thank you. We had 4 schools that were closed to transfers of any kind. There just was no more room because we also have to make space for the ones who move in. We know our obligation is to our residents, the residents who live there. We know that we're obligated to them to provide seats in those schools for the kids who live within those attendance boundaries. So we use the transfer process to maintain stable schools and budgets overall at those schools for the people we have assigned and working there. And so we can turn that dial down and open it back up. This is my 3rd year in the district. In my 1st year in the district, staff came to me and said, wow, we need to address what's happening at this one neighborhood. We'll just call it Lisa J. Males neighborhood. That's the actual neighborhood we're talking about. There's lots of kids that go to Lisa J. Males. It's a pretty popular school. There's over 1,000 students there. There's, I think, 1,020 or 1,100. There's a lot of kids. It's a big campus. It's a great school. People want to have their kids there. We have lots of kids who transfer there. And it's on this edge adjacent from another district. And so for some, it's like, I'd rather go there than here. So they put in their transfer request. And then partway through the year, we're having a problem where we're not meeting the need of our residents. So we decided, let's turn this down. And so we dialed back the number of transfers that we allowed. So in my 2nd year in the district, we were able to keep that enrollment right around 1,000. And we were able to accommodate all those moves, all those new kiddos and families who came in partway through the year. And it worked out really well. And so that's an example of how we use that to open it up and close it down. This is the next one there, next bullet is siblings of children. Once we accept a family, we let a family stay. We don't believe in breaking up families. That's not what we do. We want to keep families together and keep our families connected to us as best as we can. So once we have siblings, we let them come in as well. And again, other times we get students that come to us. We might have denied them for whatever reason. Maybe they have we're looking through their records, and it's not necessarily the best of students coming to us. And if we deny some student or their special education or whatever else it is that we're denying them, they will go to the county and appeal that. I have yet to ever see a county deny a transfer. They almost always approve them, and then we're responsible to accept those kids. And so these are some ways that inter-district, inter meaning from outside the district to us, happen. They come to us. Yes.
Dr. Andrews, can you talk a little bit about the difference between a student who has been given the okay to transfer in through the county versus us accepting them, and what controls we have over that student
So
with their continued enrollment?
Right. So once we accept a student into our schools, we typically let them stay. We kind of are counting on them as part of our stable budget to allow them to stay in the district. We also, again, knowing where the feeder pattern is, like where's their room they can stay with us. So once that happens, we let them come in. Also, if we approve the transfer, we are responsible, actually the family and us, we have the authority to, if something goes sideways, let's say that kiddo all of a sudden they're having some behavior issues and we can't correct it, and it's more and more of the same problem. We could deny a transfer and they would have to go back to their home school district and go there, and they wouldn't be able to appeal that process. And so it does allow us, because again, it's a privilege to transfer out and transfer into a school. That's a privilege. And so people have to live up to that privilege to be able to do that. One more element about this that's helping us to understand what's going on, and I've been sharing this with the board now for a few months in my update every week. And this year, starting this year, we are doing a residency verification process. And we haven't done it in many years. It's been before the pandemic. So those of us who've been raising our kids for a while, we all remember the days where you go and drop off your kids, there was a big giant stack of papers and you filled them out and you brought in a copy of your utility bill, and someone made a copy of that and they matched it to make sure that what was on your utility bill matched the address on your paperwork. We used to do that a long time ago. We stopped doing it for a while. And as the year progressed and we heard more about some of the challenges we're having with some of our students, we realized that we have some people who are probably not in their right school and they don't have any paperwork in place. We hear stories out, and actually we had a parent in an IEP, meaning they have a special education, state openly that they did not live in the district and they were using somebody else's address. And we're like, what? And it's just like blatant abuse of the system. So we're acting in good faith, and we don't always get acted in good faith. So we need to say, okay, we need to reinstate the process. Now, be very, very clear, and everyone who's listening, we are not kicking kids out if they've got some sort of missing document or something doesn't match. We want to get it squared away. We just want to get it corrected. We want accurate and truthful information. If you want to come and be in Murrieta Valley, do it the right way. Come through the front door, fill out the paperwork. Let's go through the process. That's what we'll do. And so we're not interested in any point in time of like denying someone's transfer or something if it's not in place. We're going to want to get that resolved and corrected and have the appropriate paperwork in place. We need good quality information about our transfers.
But it's my understanding if we don't approve a transfer, it goes to the county, they approve it. We do not have that ability to deny the transfer later or to ask that student to leave if the student is not working out in our district. We're kind of stuck with them. Is that correct?
It doesn't automatically, if we deny a transfer, it doesn't automatically go to the county. They have
The
to
parents have
appeal
to
it.
take it, sure.
They appeal it. If it's approved by the county board of education, then yes, we are required to accept that student regardless of their needs or behaviors or whatever they do. So
Okay.
it becomes a challenge and it's a burden. So, or it can be, not always is it, obviously. On occasion, it is. All right, this is really hard to see. This is, no one you're gonna be able to understand this chart. Sorry, but it's in the slide deck. It'll be posted online. You can zoom in on it. This is actually, I pulled this right off of a slide that we used back on February of this school year when we had our board workshop. This is a listing of all of our transfers. I believe it's of the prior school year, 22-23, because we presented this in 23-24. And so this is a little bit older data. But this shows you actually the number, the percent of students and where they all come from. And so trustees, I know you've got hard copies that you can look at. Those of you here, Oh, I guess you can see that one pretty well. Maybe it's me. All right. It is me. So the column, what it is you can look at the first one, say Alta Murrieta Elementary School. You can see that top square in red with the white lettering. Those are the children, 678 students who actually live in the attendance boundaries of Alta, go to Alta. But if you follow that column down, you can see all the students who have transferred in from various schools, of which ones they've come from, right? And then you can see that 75% of their kids come from their neighborhood and 17 come from somewhere else. And some come from other districts. Now, it doesn't say why, what their reason is. I mean, they could be employees of kids. There's all different kinds of reasons why they're there. But you have it on this slide, you can see, again, this is a snapshot in time. This is not current data. This is a snapshot from the past. You can see that we have students transferring to and from all different schools, and they come in different amounts. And some are, like, for example, Lisa J. Males has 240 kids coming from outside. It's a lot of kids. It's also a big campus, and it's where it's located. It would draw that many families. Okay. If you look at the high school, you see similar information on the high school and middle schools on all of that. But we use the transfer process to maintain stable funding. We use that process to keep our budget stable and to keep our staffing employed where they are and provide the quality services that we do provide. It's part of what draws people to this district is the ability to do that. But keep in mind, we do have controls to a certain extent of how many students come and go into each school. And that's what we have currently, okay? All right, I think that takes us up to mine. So to accommodate growth going forward, we need to plan and think about where are these students coming. We all see them, it's become quite evident. As we know in this past year with the housing that's taken place, the influx of housing that's happening, some of the bigger projects, for example, the Vineyard, they are back at it trying to get a plan approved to proceed. We wish them the best of luck in their work. They have work to do. The city is working with them, but other developers are coming right along behind and developing properties and growth. All it takes is a quick drive around town to see like, oh, wow, the hillside by Vista Murrieta is going to be an apartment complex, right? Yep, you've seen it. If you drive down Los Alamos, there are 2 brand new stoplights this week, right? Officers, you've seen those? Those are pretty exciting. Like, oh, wow, 2 more stoplights to, maybe it'll help with traffic control. There's probably some positives, but it's like, how do we get in and out of this apartment complex? So my point is this, is like, it's happening. We need to be prepared because, again, we want our students to have great experiences with our great adults in some great spaces. And so how do we accommodate that? Again, I know in this room, there's lots of approaches to how to get it done, but let's stay committed to that common function. Let's stay committed to that common purpose. We will get there. It's going to take us time. It's going to take some listening. It's going to take some reasoning, but we can get there. So I encourage some thoughtfulness about that. I'm going to turn the time over to Mr. Darren Daniel and his crew from Woolpert, and he'll introduce them.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Andrus. Good evening, board. Thank you so much for allowing us some time this evening to be able to talk about the next steps to accommodate the projected growth here in the Valley. And so today I'm joined with Scott Newell and Karen Jackson, both from Woolpert. Woolpert is the new company that merged with Cooperative Strategies. And for those who are listening, Cooperative Strategies has been an educational consultant for years. They've primarily been responsible for our enrollment projections, our demographic data that we receive every year to be able to project out how many kids we're going to be getting at each school site and what we should begin to plan for. We use this data not only to be able to find seats in a classroom for students, but also it's a good predictor of how we staff our schools. And so they've been a reliable and a trusted partner for a number of years inside the district. So this evening, we're lucky enough to have Karen Jackson, who is on the demographic team with Woolpert. And one of her primary focuses is boundary analysis and housing studies. And so tonight, her and Scott are going to be able to join us and talk through some of the steps that a district would take and some recommendations for us as we begin the discussion of taking on redistricting or maybe changing attendance boundaries to accommodate the growth across the Valley. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and turn that over to Karen, and I'll pass this torch here.
Okay, I think it's working. I'm not used to microphones. I apologize. Is it just going to start?
Mhm.
Oh, awesome. All right. Well, thank you for having us. As Darren mentioned, I'm Karen Jackson. I do this work all over the country. A lot of redistricting work for districts. We also do a lot of demographic studies, and you are obviously familiar with our demographic studies because you've been working with Andrew for quite some time. So this is our team. Andrew's sitting there right in the middle, so you should be familiar with him. He is usually our staff member that works on your demographic project. But we also have me and Anne on our team, as well as a variety of other staff as well. So getting into redistricting. This is your school attendance boundary policy, board policy 5116A. This is just on your website, and this is very common. It looked like there's a couple other districts that we've worked in the state that have used the same criteria. So I'm not going to go through each of these. I just wanted to let you know it is on there. You do have a policy around it. These would be used as criteria when creating boundary options. So we would look at school enrollment. Of course, the first thing we want to do in any boundary process is balance enrollments. That is why we're doing this. But while we're doing that, we also want to take into these other factors into account. Something I do want to note on the first bullet point, school enrollment data, including shifting enrollment patterns. Your policy actually says declining enrollment patterns, but we did update that to say shifting because you're not necessarily declining. So with any sort of process like this, it can be tough, and it can be tough for folks to accept. Moving students it's always a tough process, and we want to include as much community input as we possibly can. But we do have a couple of anticipated issues that we just hear across the country in these. First of all, transportation. Transportation is an issue nationwide. Many school districts just do not have the resources they used to. There's a lack of bus drivers and so on. Most districts are in a tight spot with transportation. So in order to kind of right size that, we would want to maximize walk zones with any sort of boundary process. So making sure that we are including all the students that can walk to that school in that boundary. We also want to assign entire neighborhoods to schools. This allows for easier bus stops, so we don't have two buses going through the same community at the same time to go to two separate schools. The more we can kind of consolidate routes, the better. And we also want to, of course, consider the distance that students travel to school with any boundary option. And this is something that we could quantify throughout the process. Next up is transfers, and we already kind of talked about this. There's kind of two options for transfers, and they can be intertwined. First, we could create the space at schools to allow for transfers. Or the other option is kind of doing what you are already doing, prioritizing those neighborhood students, the students that live within the boundary, and allowing transfers after that, once you fill the school with the students that actually live there. Portables are tough. They're typically a permanent temporary fix. So of course, what we want to do, we want students in that permanent space. So we would want to adjust the boundaries to account for future growth so that we don't need to rely on portables. The other thing we would want to do, of course, is utilize our enrollment and housing projections to make sure that we won't need portables in the future. Next is the possibility of a future school site. Something that we have done in other communities when there is a possible school site in the future that could exist, we can do a phased boundary plan where we make moves now with anticipated moves later. What we do not like doing in these processes is moving a student now just to move them again in a couple years when a new school site comes available. While certainly that can't be guaranteed for all students, that is something that we pay very close attention to. We don't want to impact students more than once in their career. So as much as possible, creating a plan that minimizes the number of moves. And then, of course, there is a 6-year timeline for a new school. So the question here is, do we want to be proactive or reactive? I'll kind of get through the specifics, the school-by-school specifics of what we are expecting to see. But Murrieta Elementary is expected to be overutilized as soon as 2 years from now. And within the next 6 years, we are showing 4 elementary schools being overutilized and Thompson Middle School being ever so slightly under overutilized. They're at 98%. what we typically recommend is that schools exist between that like 80 and 90% utilization. That allows for especially large cohorts that are moving through the system. It also allows for additional special education spaces should you need to make a classroom, or even resource or title spaces. So anywhere in that 80 to 90% really allows for that flexibility at the school for them to kind of exist and take on those ebbs and flows of enrollment year after year.
I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah. You had mentioned shifting versus declining, because I read all over the place that we have declining population. Now, that's not necessarily the case in Murrieta. It could be different, right? But I wanted you to try to clarify that for me. So you did change that terminology. You said, everywhere we hear declining. I'm hearing a lot of that. Shifting. Explain just briefly, if you could, why you changed that wording.
You're actually setting me up perfectly for this next slide.
Okay, that works out well then.
Yeah, awesome.
Good.
So in looking at your projections, on the east side of the district, we are seeing some decline with the existing boundaries. So if the boundaries stay exactly the same way they are today, we are seeing some decline on the east side. Now, let's look at the west side. We're seeing vast enrollment growth on the west side. So overall, we are projecting growth. While it is kind of geographically specific. That's why I changed it to shifting, because you're not declining all over and you're not increasing all over.
Right. And then in terms of that, is most of that projection coming from the apartment buildings, or is that some kind of demographic, a lot of young families moving to the west side?
It's a combination. So our projections includes birth information as well as those housing, the residential development as well. So in looking at this slide, so this is showing your current elementary attendance areas. On the left, we have the 23-24 utilizations, and on the right, we have our 33-34, so 10 years out. Anything in green is kind of that sweet spot. That's the 80 to 90% utilized at the buildings. That's really where we want to be. So this past school year, you had 3 schools in that range, which is great. Yellow is approaching overutilization, so that's in the 90 to 100% utilized range. Anything in red is over 100% utilized. The lighter red is showing between 100 and 115% utilized, and that dark red is showing anything over 115% utilized. And then the blue is showing underutilization, so schools that are less than, I think, 70% utilized is shown in blue. So you can really see with these maps where the impact is going to be. It's that west side. That west side is where we are expecting to see that growth. And should no changes occur, we are looking at 4 schools being overutilized within the next 10 years. And Murrieta Elementary, gosh, I think they're at like 168% utilized in 10 years because that boundary contains most of those developments in it.
I have a question, but
Yes.
probably not for you. I think this is for you, James. On the financial report for the budget, the school district certification, the item that's called declining enrollment, A3, it says that we do have declining enrollment. Is enrollment decreasing in both the prior fiscal year and budget year? But anyway, I'm just seeing that here. I don't know how that factors into.
I'm going to do my best here. So if you recall, I presented a slide to you in February that talked about some of the decline in enrollment. So we've been on this little bit of a dip going down, and I think that dip ends in this upcoming 24-25 school year. Then we get on this upward trajectory. Now, again, this is a projected enrollment trajectory. What you see is this year is the year TK will be in full tact, and will TK be fully utilized by this community as well, and will that continuously grow through? But over the years where Wolpert's done our projections, they've been pretty spot on. There's been years they've been right on for particular schools, and there's been times where we've had some anomalies up or down. But overall, I think, we utilize them because it provides us a pretty good picture. And so we've been on this declining enrollment. It hasn't been a cliff, but it has been this kind of clip downwards. And this year we sit, I think, about around low 22,000 students, 22,100 and change is my recollection. Then we start to move upward after this year. Now, I would like for everybody to remember the demographic population that we're talking about through the study was the things that we knew at the time through the city. But that's a snapshot in time. And so since then, we've already seen new developments be approved by the city, and new developments already starting to put sticks in the ground that were not even on our radar this last year. The land next to Vista Murrieta High School is a good example. And so we are going to see some shifts, but we start to see more development coming in because of the laws into Murrieta, probably than more people who are leaving us. And so again, I wish I had a better science for you, but as far as when it comes down to the demographic projections, it starts to come on the upward tick starting 25, 26. And that's when you start to see some of our schools become very tight. And so that's that kind of that urgency, we've done a great job historically trying to accommodate families and whatever, but at different times, I think we've kind of done better jobs trying to balance. And I think it's always been out of trying not to provide change. And if we look at, the middle school level, although it's Thompson on the west side of town that really is impacted, we really don't have a whole lot of options other than moving students from one middle school to another. But at the same time, we have a lot of space at Warm Springs that we can accommodate families. And so being able to balance the population, I think, would be something we should also entertain.
Thank you.
A question. Have you worked out a formula at all, just rough even, the difference in the buildings between a commercial apartment building and a government building, and how many people are possibly, or how many people in a family are supposed to be in either one of those?
I'm not completely sure. We had another one of our team members do the projections, but I can definitely ask and get that answer.
We have that.
I have that.
Oh.
And so, and I don't have the exact numbers because I wasn't prepared for that question. But Paul, when we talked about our enrollment projections, it is broken down by how many elementary, middle, or high school students to typically come from a multi-family unit versus a single family unit. And so it is a bit different. And so historically in our community, our apartments have not yielded a high number of students historically, but we haven't had a high number of apartments come in. What I think is changing for us, and again, only time will tell, the apartments that are coming in, a number of them are low income, and there's a waiting list to get into these. And so we are going to see an influx of students just because we're building up, not out. But yes, when Woolpert does our growth projections, they do have a table talks about our averages of how many are coming from apartments and how many coming from houses.
When will we have access as a board to that?
You've already have it, and so I can resend it to you.
No, we resend it. It was actually presented in February.
Okay.
Yep.
Would you agree that this is pretty unique times? I think I'm talking, when I say that, I happen to be, my son's going to be getting married soon. All his friends are getting married. I mean, I think it feels like wedding season. I think you had someone getting married as well. And so all these young people I've taught and I'm watching them go into adulthood, finding a ton of people, families living together in the large homes in Murrieta. And I'm finding a lot of young people living with their parents. And I'm also finding a lot of young people saying, there's no way I'm going to be able to raise a kid in this city. And a lot of those people are leaving Murrieta to other states, and they're house hunting in other states. And so the part of this that really gets me, because it impacts me directly, is I think the state forced our city to build those apartments, if I'm not mistaken. I'm just out of curiosity. I felt like that was a real serious problem. Additionally, I feel like the state also forced us into the TK classroom situation and didn't provide any money for us as well. I think Dr. Andrus has confirmed that earlier. So I think when we're talking about the community at large, these are important factors. And then it's been, well, coming up on 2 years. A lot of social issues and unrest and some crazy things happening in our world right now. And there's a huge divide. And I've heard more people saying, I'm very concerned about sending my kids to a middle school. I'm really considering homeschooling my kids. I'm going to break the bank to send my kids to a private school. I'm just not entirely convinced that this is spot on in terms of who's going to be moving into the apartments, one, and also how many people. I'm waiting to see. You did say 10-year projection. It's a projection, and I appreciate you emphasizing that. But I do just feel like we're in a very unique situation, and the feedback I'm getting is slightly. It's on the negative side. And so when you say shifting, who knows? I do feel like who knows what's going to happen. But anyway, I just wanted to add those two things.
I do wish we had more data on this instead of just anecdotal
Well,
reflections from our neighbors.
When we look at the projections, we do look at a number of factors. You know, as Karen said, birth rates, student generation factors, residential developments, in addition to the cohort survival rates of us. In addition, I think one thing that's been unique for Murrieta is there's not a great big private school here in the neighborhood. You know, we've had a great run of being able to capture the attention of our families. And like I said, I've had the good fortune of having children go through the system, much like Mr. Pardue. But I think historically, if this is an anomaly, this will be the first time. But I think what reigns true still for us is a lot of families who are here having children here. And what's interesting, there was one time around recession time in early 2000s where we did see our high school students or secondary schools outpace our elementary school. And that was really what we thought our thought was because of the cost of a home. What was interesting now is we're really seeing the mushroom cloud of elementary school families moving into Murrieta. And so we are seeing young families in that coming in, moving in from coastal communities. Right before the interest rates went up, we started to see a lot of new families come into Murrieta and enjoying in our schools. And so that was a little bit of different than what we saw the last time around when we had like this swap in kind of the age demographic in our schools, where it went from once upon a time heavy elementary, then went to heavy secondary, back now heavy elementary, and high schools soon will capture those kids as they move through the system.
Mrs. Jackson, a question. When I was, and some of these people have heard this already, when I was teaching in Glendale in the 70s, some of you aren't even born then, but never mind. History lesson. The city changed rather drastically over a 20-year period. It changed from being all Caucasian to Caucasian and Armenian. What happened was that, and I'll shorten it, one family would come over, buy an apartment. Then they would advertise, and 2 or 3 other families would come and live in that apartment till they had found a job and gotten enough money to, buy something else. Do you have a formula for that? Have you provided for that kind of activity?
That should be naturally kind of baked in to the cohort survival method of the projections. If it has been occurring already, then it would assume that would continue. I work in a lot of school districts in central Ohio that have a similar demographic. We have folks moving in and living in it's a single family home, but we have 2 or 3 families living there. And overall, it doesn't have as big of an impact as you would think. But when we look at the student yields or the student generation rates from that area, you can definitely tell that that area is being impacted by that. I will say the good thing is you're already kind of tracking that. You're already looking at those student generation rates and things like that. So that would be baked in. But from a demographic standpoint, you are doing the right things by kind of keeping track of that and doing this annually, especially because you do have some enrollments changing.
Thank you.
All right. So let's move on to middle schools. These are the same maps. Well, they're your middle school boundaries and utilizations, but same idea. So the green is kind of where we want to be, that 70 to 80% or 80 to 90% utilized. I'm sorry. So if we look for our last year's utilizations at the middle school level, we're doing just fine. We have Thompson Middle School is our most highly utilized school. That's in green. So last year it was in good shape. If we look at the east side of the district, though, we do have some underutilization. Warm Springs is the one that's already been brought up. I think they're around 55% utilized. So when we look at 10 years out, you can kind of get an idea of where we would want to go with that. We certainly can't have a building sitting at 110% while another one sits at 55%. That usually doesn't fly in a community. I'm sure the folks that go to the 55% school would say differently, but we do want to balance that and make sure that all of our students are getting an equal experience across buildings. So this chart shows the same information just year by year. And you can see the colors are the same for the map. So red means overutilized, blue means underutilized. But if we look at this, you can see that 25-26 is really going to be the start of the pinch point from our projections. If we look at Murrieta Elementary, they're at 105% 2 years out from now. If you continue to look at that elementary school moving forward, we get to 168% at that building. That's unreal. And as we talked about already, most of the development is pointed at that boundary. If we look at the middle schools, again, we've got some underutilization, but Thompson Middle School is really going to be the pinch point. That's something that we would want to address early on. And honestly, we would also want to look at feeders too, to make sure that we have schools feeding into middle schools and then high schools together. So with Thompson, for example, that could just be a feeder change that we make to address that growth in that area. But as I said before, with Murrieta Elementary, all the growth is pointed at Thompson. So something has to be addressed with that boundary.
So what you're saying, for example, is, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but it could be an example. Murrieta Elementary students, instead of feeding into Thompson, would maybe feed into Shavela, or would feed into Warm Springs. Is that?
I'm not sure about that because I think Thompson lives within Murrieta's boundary.
Right.
So that wouldn't really make sense. But we certainly wouldn't want to create a boundary scenario that has like 5% of one of your Eastern middle school or Eastern elementary schools going to Thompson or something like that. We would want to try to address feeders within that as well, just to make sure that we have big groups of students moving on to middle school and then high school together. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, is there any, when you're working with these flows, for us, it's important to know programs that keep connecting.
Yep.
That's how are we handling that? For example, if you have strings in 5th grade in elementary school, and you want those people to be able to have a string program when you get to middle school, etc., for high school. How are we planning for that, or does that come second?
That would really become kind of, if we go back to our policies, the first look is how are we balancing the utilization of the buildings first. And we can then possibly make adjustments into program offerings at those other places where we may shift a staff member from one school to another. But the primary focus, first of all, is utilization of the buildings and then neighborhoods. How do we keep big chunks of neighborhoods together? Because we know these families, and we know because I live in a neighborhood and there's kids around, they're all friends because they go to school together and they're in the same neighborhood and they play together. And so we try to keep batches or neighborhoods together as we move them. And so the program feature afterthought is the wrong word, but it does come later in the process.
But it will be looked at.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, so this is my last demographic slide. This should have been in your report, I believe it was, but On the left, we show the residential developments as of October of last year. So these are your current elementary boundaries in the background. Those yellow boxes or polygons are going to be the developments that we knew about as of last October. So you can see where the majority of them are, of course, on the west side of the district, and most of them are within the current Murrieta Elementary School, and that is the main reason for that big enrollment growth that we're projecting. I do want to point out a couple things about that table. First of all, Cole Canyon is not listed on this table right here. That is because we don't have any of the developments pointed at the current Cole Canyon boundary. So if there are schools missing from the listing in this table, that is because we didn't have developments pointed at them. This is just a summary of the single family and multifamily units within the boundaries that are being impacted. So if we look at Murrieta L, where we have, I can't read that number, 841 students that we're projecting. Something to note about that, I can't say for certain if they're all going to be brand new students. They could be students just moving from within the district. That is not going to be all of them. So there's more than likely going to be some students that are not brand new to your schools, but a lot of them could be. If we look at Chavella and Thompson, we're seeing 260 projected students. That's just middle school students, and then 447. It's also important to note that we don't have any classroom space available at Thompson or Cole Canyon at the moment.
This is a city map boundary, is that correct?
No,
No,
these are your attendance boundaries.
That's the district, school district.
Well, that's curious because they're showing a yellow new building triangle right on my house. And all those houses have been there for quite some time. So I'm not sure what that is.
We didn't want to break it to you, but
Oh,
We'll have to check that.
'cause this is a city boundary. Anyway, okay.
So
We'll look at it.
what this is I think a residential development, a map from the city with a boundaries probably laid over it. So there might be an absolute scale issue here. But,
Okay.
I think the purpose of this is really looking at the residential developments, and you can actually see the yellow, what stands out to me
I get
anyway.
it.
How much yellow is happening on the west versus the east?
I'm not getting a new house?
Well,
No.
it's up to you. I'll talk to your husband. We'll see if we can work it around.
It might also be one of the ADUs. Maybe there's a couple ADUs in your neighborhood. All right. So moving on to our standard boundary planning process, what this would look like. I do have a slide for each of these, so I'm going to kind of go back. But the one thing I want to mention is that we do run a very iterative process. We like to engage early with the community, get their thoughts on what boundary options should even look like in the first place, and utilize that throughout the process. We like to include them when we are sharing options. So we want feedback throughout the process on the boundary options. We want to hear why folks like them, why they don't like them. And when we get that feedback, then we go right back to the drawing board and look at those options and make modifications based on the feedback. We really do pride ourselves in starting with a big group of options and narrowing it down based on our community feedback and what you all want to see in a boundary plan.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
When did you start working on this project? And then when were you notified about the board meeting being now? Just because I was only notified a few weeks ago that we were suddenly having this meeting. Have you been working on this project for some time? Because I know I had the same data for a little bit.
That would have been Andrew Bishop, who I mentioned.
Yeah, okay, maybe I should clarify. Your company, do you know how long you guys have been working on these boundary issues and collecting the data? How long has that been?
For this district or
For this
overall?
district, just
Oh.
for the district here for this particular
We
presentation?
haven't done any boundary work yet.
Uh-uh.
So we've done your demographics, so we
The
have data to show what's going on.
Right.
Right now, we're just kind of giving you an information session on how we go about a boundary process. So we have the demographics which support a need to look at your boundaries. So this session is just, here's how we go about doing it. Here's what you should consider before you might embark on this journey of adjusting your boundaries.
But you were notified pretty quickly as well.
Oh, yeah. About
I found out last week.
Last week. Thank you.
All right. So we start our boundary planning process off with a plan for planning meeting. And all that is us and the administrators going through the goals for this process. We're gonna go through what our steps in the process are, the timeline. We can also discuss other comparable processes that we've run if you don't want to take our standard approach. And then define our expectations, both the district's expectations of us, the district's expectations of the community engagement, and of course, what we are expecting to receive from the district in terms of data and things like that. So once we get data, that includes everything from capacity, student address data, things like that, so that we can put everything on the map that we need for this process. We'll create a background report that will be available on a project website throughout the process. That report is often updated throughout the process. If we get a request for a map, we will add it in there because why not let everybody see it? Within these processes, we try to be as transparent as possible. The more information that we can give to the community so that they can make informed decisions when they're giving us feedback and things like that, the smoother the process runs. So our background report will be available throughout the entire process. It'll give just a high-level look at why we're doing this, what it looks like, as well as other demographic data that we're looking at. The other thing that we like to do is a closest school map. So what that will look at is what your boundaries would look like if every student attended their geographically closest school, because inevitably that will be a question that comes up. We always hear that. Why can't I just go to the closest school? Why can't my student go to their closest school? And it's a great question. Unfortunately, with the capacities of the buildings and where the populations have moved over the years, that's not possible. I'm sure if we could pick up all the schools and put them exactly where they need to be in the population centers, we would, but that can't happen. So we like to answer the questions that we know that we're going to get ahead of time through this background data. So we do typically utilize a committee throughout this process. The committee is usually made up of school and community stakeholders, so maybe one representative from each school plus a couple community at large members who kind of have the whole community in mind. We want to make sure folks are geographically diverse. Usually that's accomplished by choosing folks specifically from schools, then we can kind of naturally get that diversity. The biggest part of the committee is they must agree to consider the district as a whole and remain objective throughout the process. We don't want folks coming to our committee with an agenda. It's very obvious when somebody comes into a committee and they do not want to move. Of course, nobody wants to move, but it's very obvious when they start drawing boundaries around their home. So having folks agree ahead of time in an application process or something like that, that they will consider the district as a whole is very important. We like the committee to assist in creating options with us. We certainly aren't going to give them all of the data, so like the student address data, but we can split that up into smaller little planning units that we can make options with them. We have found that when committees are making the options, they have a greater understanding of we make one move and the domino it has across the district. It's especially important when we get into community meetings. We like our committee to be present at those meetings and talking to their neighbors and having those conversations, because when a community member comes and say, did you look at this? Did you try this? Typically they're, yes, we did, and this is why it can't happen. And it is so helpful to have that kind of advocacy group that really is like a talking piece for us. Well, we will certainly be there at the community meetings as well, but there's a big difference in me telling someone something and their own community member telling them the same thing. Throughout the process, as I mentioned before, we would utilize your boundary planning criteria to guide our options creation. Once we have the committee make those options initially, we'll take them back to our admin team and go through them. If there's any modifications needed for whatever reason, we will make those, and that admin team is really who is determining which options move forward for community feedback. We really like to leave no stone unturned. If it's an option, let's explore it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, at least we have a reasoning why. So moving on to community engagement. So along with a couple other opportunities, we typically like to initially survey the community about your criteria to kind of prioritize those. Right now, the way that policy is written, none of them are prioritized. Of course, we want to balance enrollments. That is always number one in a boundary process. But beyond that, we really want to see how your community wants to see these boundaries drawn. Do Do they care that neighborhoods are stick together? Do they care that students attend their closest school and things like that? And we will try to stick to that as much as possible. So once we have our initial options using that criteria that we talked about, we will present that to the community for feedback. We really want to make sure in those meetings that the community fully understands why we are doing this process. If we don't give them that, there's a lot of questions that we're going to have to answer. So we might as well get ahead of it. We like to have in-person and online feedback opportunities. Often our online community meetings are better attended than our in-person ones. Even during the day, I found that people are a lot more willing to come to meetings during the workday than they are at night. So we like to have a variety of options for folks to come in, ask their questions, and get the information so that they can provide us the feedback that we need to move forward in the process. Yeah, go ahead.
And would you provide multiple times to come in and do those in the same community? So you could have a weekday one, you could have weekday evening ones, you may even have some on weekends, just to accommodate.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, good.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah, whatever works in your community is what we will do. We want to make sure that we get the feedback that we need from folks. The feedback is the most imperative part of the entire process. So if we're not reaching out to people and getting that, then we're not doing our jobs. We also will create a report for all the community feedback so folks can go in and see exactly what their neighbors said. They won't know who said it, of course, but they can go in and read all the comments. They can see the qualitative and quantitative data. When we do that, we find that folks have a better acceptance of what's happening. Maybe they had a different opinion than almost everybody else in the community, and they can really see why we chose to go a certain route over another. So as I mentioned, we do run a very iterative process. So once we get that feedback from the community after the first round of community engagement, we go back to the drawing board and we look at our options. If there's an option that is just stellar all the way around, usually there's not. But if there is, great, we did our job. If there's not, usually there's not, then we will make modifications based on the feedback that we receive and bring it back to the community. So unless there's a very clear direction that we're going to go, we typically have a second round of community engagement. It may not be the big community meetings because most of the time folks already have their questions answered, but we'll have at least a survey to provide them with the updated options based on their feedback. I really like the image at the bottom of this slide. This really shows the nature of the process. So in this community, we started off with 16 options, narrowed it down to 6, then 4, then 2, and then 1. And that's really how our process is run. As much feedback as we can get and as many iterations as we need in order to make a product that is going to be acceptable and provide longevity to the community. And with that brings us to our recommendation. So we like our recommendations, of course, to support your criteria in your policy as well as the community feedback. The recommendation can come to you in a couple different ways. We can have the committee come up with a recommendation, a committee recommendation that we bring to you. We could also bring you options with feedback from the committee. If you want to discuss and kind of figure that on your own, that's totally fine. We've done the recommendations in a variety of ways pretty successfully. So that would be up to you. If you want a committee recommendation, awesome. We will get you one. If you want to kind of discuss on your own with our final options, that's fine as well. So a typical timeline for a full community engagement process, which would include a committee, multiple engagement rounds, so 2 different options rounds, as well as that initial survey to kind of prime folks for the process, get them understanding what we're doing, why we're doing it, and to quantify or rank that criteria that you guys have. We're looking at about 25 weeks. Now, keep in mind, 25 weeks does not include any major any holidays. So like Thanksgiving week, we probably can't meet during that week. Same with the winter holiday. We're probably gonna be off school, just like you guys. So that wouldn't include any of those breaks. This can certainly be tailored to you. If you don't feel like 5 committee meetings is necessary, we can pare that down. I would say no less than 3 would be ideal. For kind of our piece, we will facilitate all the committee and community meetings. We can also be a part in the committee figuring out who's going to be on the committee, so an application process or something like that, or if that's something you want to take on, that's fine as well. It would just, that would be up to you if you want us to facilitate that. We would also maintain the project website, so we'd have a project website up the entire time of the process. It has everything. It has descriptions of what happened at each meeting. It'll have just all of our materials that we create, every presentation and things like that. We also like to have an FAQ page, which I'll get to in a moment. And we will provide all the materials related to the process. What we would expect from you is to provide the data sets that we request. We can't make up student data, so that's something that we would need from you all. And we would also like a couple representatives to be present at meetings for questions that we may not be able to answer, things beyond boundaries, such as like programmatic questions and things like that. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention, when we do our community engagement sessions, we do have an interactive locator, a school locator with all the options. So instead of folks scouring maps and trying to figure out exactly where their house falls in each one, they can just type their address in and it plops out whatever their assignments are for every option. It makes it so much easier. So we will have that available throughout the entire process and into implementation as well, so that community members can see, okay, where they're going in each option, if they're even moving in each option, and so on. So in terms of communications, I mentioned this earlier, but we do like to engage early on with stakeholders. Typically what we'll do is we will come to a board meeting, introduce the process, the timeline, everything, and then we will introduce that initial survey that kind of allows your community members to rank your criteria, so we can really get an idea of which criteria we need to prioritize. Oftentimes those criteria can be in direct contradiction of one another. If you say, let's say the community says, I want entire neighborhoods to go to the same school, but also I want to go to the closest school as much as possible. Well, sometimes those two cannot mix. We might have neighborhoods that are far too big to send to the same school and stuff like that. We also like to provide data ahead of time. We just want to get in front of the questions. We like to allow stakeholders to analyze the data for themselves, see the position we're in, so that they can accept the process and kind of get on board with why we're going through this. We like to engage stakeholders often. We like to provide multiple chances for feedback. And then should there be a case where there's a community that's changing a lot in our options, maybe it's a specific community that's kind of on the edge of the boundary and they're kind of moved to a couple different schools in the options that we present, if we're not hearing from them, we will reach out to them. In other communities, we have gone to churches, we have gone to other community functions to be there to answer their questions. If we are not hearing from them, that is a problem, especially if they're moved. We likely will not hear from folks that are not moved in any option, and that is going to be the case for probably a lot of people. They just aren't impacted. But those who are impacted, we really need to hear from them. As I mentioned before, we will have a project website throughout the entire project. That'll be up. That's a leave behind too. You will have that, so if folks 5 years down the road decide, oh, why did we change these boundaries? Why did we do this? Why do they look the way they do? It'll still be there. In terms of our communications milestones, as I mentioned, we'll start off with that boundary criteria survey. We also like to have an FAQ page on the project website where we continually add to it as questions come in. Our website has a function where you can set up a survey, it's like a little question thing. So folks can type in their email, type in their question, and then we will receive it. We can answer that question to them personally, but we can also answer it on the website so that folks can kind of find their own answers to things. We'll have initial options, so the community meetings and the survey. We'll have a final options survey or community meetings if you wish to have additional community meetings as well. We can hold focus groups for those underrepresented communities, so the communities that we aren't hearing from if we don't hear from them. With our surveys, we do ask for an address every time. That way we can pinpoint that feedback, where it's coming from. We can see what certain neighborhoods are thinking. That is not information we actually ever share even with the school district. It's something we would look at internally. It would not be within the report or anything like that. It is just for our purposes to kind of pinpoint where we're getting the feedback from and what each community is saying. And then, of course, all along the way, we would do Board of Education updates so that you all stay updated throughout the process and understand what's going on, why certain decisions are being made. So I just want to highlight a couple of experiences we've had in the state of California. As I mentioned, we do this all across the country, but these are two that we've done more recently. First, Oxnard Union High School District, they were actually adding a building. So we went there and redistricted for this building in the center of town. They had declining enrollment in the north side, but increasing enrollment in the center of town. So they built a new high school and we did redistricting for them. That process, there was a lot of community engagement involved. We met with the district, we met with the community to kind of get their feelings on it, and I believe ended up getting a 5-0 vote on the boundaries that were recommended. The next would be Santa Rosa City Schools. In this process, they were converting a middle school into a magnet school. So what we did is we had to take that boundary and parse it into the other middle school boundaries so that they could have that full magnet school, but the students that live within the existing boundary also had a neighborhood school to attend if they didn't want to go to the language middle school. With this one, the district also wanted to maintain 100% feeders from middle to high school, so that's something that was a criteria we had to work within, and that's certainly something that we could talk about if that's a big desire in the community. I don't think I saw feeders in your policy, but that's something we can talk about. Feeders are usually a hot topic in redistricting. Within this process, we utilized a committee, as I mentioned before, that's pretty standard in our process. We like to have that community member committee. And we also utilize the same criteria as in your board policy with that one. So that's all I have. Are there any questions?
My cup runneth over. Go ahead.
I don't have any questions. I think in studying where we are and kind of looking back at some of those when we start to see the impact, and yes, to your point, Mrs. Vandergriff, we're experiencing, as was predicted by Woolpart, a slight dip in enrollment this year, and then it quickly rebounds. And then it goes on this new trajectory upward. And so knowing how long it takes us, as you saw by the number of weeks, even if we were to start as early as, say, September 1, which would be my intention, we kick off with communications in August and we start this process in full effort around September. That still takes us through the election cycle because we don't, we're going to take some time off for the given holidays. And the next board, the next seated board would be the ones who would take action. From that point in time, the work of how do we communicate to families goes underway, but it's also all the other shifts that may also occur of new transportation routes, new patterns for those transportation routes, if we have to adjust staffing from one school to another. All of those things take time for them to lay out in the out years. And so though we may have a moment in time where we have a tiny bit of reprieve, it's not going to last long. And so I think along with this process, we would also be able to determine the timeline of when these would begin to take effect. So it's not just the planning of the actual attendance boundaries as we see them now or a future version, but also an implementation timeline of when do those come into play. And so all of that needs to be mapped out as well.
You mentioned transportation routes, and I mostly during graduation year, time, that I realized how many kids in my neighborhood go to a variety of the high schools, right? And that looks like it's kind of the norm across schools. And additionally, when you talk about transportation, I know for sporting events, the parents do the transporting of kids. And so I'm just kind of curious, if a kid was in a school across town and wanted to go to another school, do we provide transportation, or is it kind of, hey, you're asking to go to that school across there, you figure your own way there?
To the best of my knowledge, when a family is accepting or requesting a transfer to a different school, they're on their own for transportation.
And could you remind me, how did we end up transporting our own athletes, just out of curiosity as I was thinking about that?
I'm going to ask Darren to take
Do you remember that?
how we transport our own students athletes.
Our own students athletes?
Well, for example, I coach at Paloma. Murrieta would always come to our tournament. And I remember being shocked seeing the parents were come in. Everyone's come in kind of piecemeal.
Yeah.
And I remember Scott Richards was the coach at the time. And I said, what's this? He says, I don't know. It's always been this way, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of out of curiosity if anyone has institutional a history that says we started having parents transporting kids because we were always told, don't you dare do that.
Yeah, and I can say I inherited that as well. When I entered the school district over 20 years ago, we had what we call meet-ats, where families are carpooling. In addition to some of the larger groups, say track and field or football, where you're taking multiple people and they all have to be there right exactly on time, where we would transport. I think it comes down to the size of fleet that Murrieta has historically had, or availability of bus or budgets. You know, so at one point in time, I know we had a process. We were asking parents to pay for transportation, and that was implemented for a brief minute. But I don't think we ever fully implemented that process. Again, I'm going back to my site days, and so, but I think we are getting. We have increased our transportation services a little bit. We do have a transportation plan, which you guys have approved. However, athletics has never been something that's been mandatory in our district. It certainly hadn't been a practice historically.
Right. And I think what I was getting at is our community is unique in that we are kind of transient. I know growing up, I was part of the busing generation. They bussed us across town, changed the border.
So-
Everyone kind of, hey, I'm going to that school, I'm going to that school.
Yeah.
And the
I
district's
I
been
think that
accommodating to that.
I think that kind of has been kind of unique to our school district. As you know, once upon a time, everybody went to Murrieta Valley High School. We opened up Vista. We allowed folks to transfer as they pleased to be able to go to the new school, regardless of where their boundary was or where their home was inside the district. Then Mesa opened, kind of the same thing. But you know, as we look at that transfer high school to high school, if you say you live in the Murrieta Valley district and want to go to Mesa, we do not offer transportation for home to school. Our home to school, we follow really in that transportation plan. We have to prioritize TK through 6th grade. That's the prioritization. In addition to a large portion of our fleet transport special needs students, and we have a obligation with that. But also we have board policy about distances, and so we have this 1 mile, 2 mile, and 3 miles. The crow flies, where we say, hey, okay, if you live in 3 miles away, over 3 miles away, you're not going to qualify for going to high school. You would try to find alternative ways. So, but it's a good segue into, as we wrestle with the population, there could be a potential where we offer less transportation at the high school because we have an obligation by state to say we need to prioritize our young students. But if we changed the boundary and we had to transport students from point A to point B, and it had to go under a freeway, I think we would prioritize and have a discussion about that transportation piece, about how we would do that. And we'd probably supersede transportation for our youngest students over our high school students. And so all predicated on what the outcomes would be with this type of discussion.
And what I can tell you, like with marching band, which is a large group at Vista Murrieta, it's about going up on 250 kids, to go to marching band competitions on Saturdays. The boosters' parents pay for that. And we contract with the district. And of course, it's on a Saturday, so buses are available. But, we're going all over in Riverside County, down to San Diego, up to LA. And you have to fundraise to pay for that. And it is not inexpensive to charter our school buses, just our yellow school buses, all the way up to these competitions. In the spring, with just my child was in winter guard, we carpooled with parents. I was always a carpool parent, which is a gas, by the way. If any of you ever get a chance to do that, you just drive and listen to those kids talk. It is awesome. But, busing would be nice.
Yep. Budgets play a big part about what we're able to afford to do. It is true. We have been able to increase our fleet. Our bus yard is stacked right now. They were parking double parked and so forth right now. But it'd be something we'd love to be able to provide. But again, it tends to be a budgetary issue. Okay.
I have one quick question.
Further comments?
One
Go
quick
ahead.
question. So do we know our enrollment numbers for this upcoming school year yet?
I think I saw something off the top of my, in an email, when we include all of our students, I think we were 22.8. Now, is that correct? There was a text message from Mr. Tukwa. 21.8. 21.8. So again, as predicted, not predicted, as a better year word, projected from Wolpert, we knew we'd have a bit of a decline this year. So
Our
that is tracking.
projection right now, just so we make absolute sense, I pulled it up while we were talking here. Our projected for 24, 25 total student enrollment would be 22,148. So, and so we're a couple hundred off right now, or a few hundred off of enrollment.
And do you have it broken out? Like, do you know what TK is of that?
I don't have that in front of me.
Okay.
I'm sorry. But again, we are in our discussions, we've been seeing that TK number is lower than, because that age, it was fully implementation this year. We counted inside the projections for a full implementation. So last year we had 623. We projected 800 just for that natural growth. And we have not seen that come to fruition yet.
Okay, thanks.
No, you're welcome.
One little element about that, what we've noticed in the past is that kindergarten used to be kind of our adjustable, we're unpredictable one, and now it's really a solid number in kindergarten, a much more solid number than we've had in the past. But TK is our new adjustable one, which kind of makes sense because we've added a grade to the schools. So
Another question. Since we rushed to have this meeting and added an extra meeting, unfortunately, Mrs. Young's not able to be here. Does this somehow facilitate, because this was something we discussed in closed session at one point. A number of times I've seen this a lot. It is just shocking to me that we had to rush a board meeting to present this, and it feels like it was just thrown together. I'm sorry, you guys did a great job. Did not mean that. I mean, it was a week and we couldn't get everybody here. And all of a sudden I had an email. It was going to be an emergency. Emails are fluttering all over the Twitterverse or whatever it's called. And then we're changed it to study session. It's this and that. Is there a benefit to this aside from, is it starting the process quicker? Is this helping you plan out or get started with these committees? Just out of curiosity, how is this beneficial to us, and what's the rush?
that's a good question. I appreciate the perspective. Again, during the course of the summer, as the summer kind of played out, and my team and I reflected on where we were in the processes of planning for growth, and what was the outcomes of not having a bond initiative. Because if we would have had a bond initiative available to us, it would have been a different conversation, like the Oxnard one, because it would have been an additional one. And we probably would have delayed that conversation because it's a different type of a conversation. But given that that isn't an opportunity in the given future, and seeing the enrollment come and spiking, or not spiking, that's the wrong word, really starting to impact, especially some West Side schools, Murrieta Elementary School, as early as 2 years from now, I felt an urgency to begin the conversation and to have, because as you can tell, we've spent an hour and a half on a presentation and we still haven't gotten to the public comment yet. And so I wanted us to be able to dedicate time to this particular topic with the community and do it in its own dedicated fashion so that we can draw appropriate attention to the magnitude of what is coming our direction. And so it allows us to, now that this has been done, it allows us to launch, in essence, I think you call it a project website, as we go through this process, so that as early as, well, as soon as school starts, I want to get the school doors open, but as late August, early September, we begin that initial communications about the community meetings so that we can have this process completed sometime in the early spring.
Well,
So it's just a timing.
yeah, and you know, because we have spoken, my concern is just, it is important to me as a school board that we have everybody here. That would be important. We had everyone here a week ago. It costs money to have this and put this on. We got out of that board meeting so quick last week. We easily could have had this. This is over a month and a half we had to contemplate this presentation. And yet we contacted these people and threw it together in a week. And not all the people could attend. So it feels contrived, and that's how it looked through some emails that got circulated around. I'm just really disappointed in the process by which we came to this board meeting. It also feels as if we wanted to avoid certain topics that were supposed to be on the last board meeting that got ignored and violating board policy, refused to be put on the agenda. And now here we are. If we want it, we throw it together at the last minute. And I just feel very manipulated by this. And I don't think it shows much respect to the board members and our time. And I would like to believe that we could be more forward thinking than this, because we have known this data for a long, long time. This is not brand new information. So I'm very disappointed in how this went down.
Well, speaking from a Navy standpoint, this is a sea change. And when you have a sea change, you have to be prepared as much as you can. And I think this is appropriate. I think the timing is good because we need to look at the material. We need to think about it during the summer and begin to act as soon as we can. I'm sorry that you feel upset about the meetings, but things are going well, and I appreciate you coming and giving us that material, because it gives us a great deal to think about. Some of the things that we had preconceived didn't occur with your presentation, and I appreciate that a lot. Any other comments?
This is just a little bit on the topic of meetings and priorities. And I'm a little concerned that we seem to be, a little bit frenetic here. And I do believe that we're 1 month over our deadline for the superintendent evaluation that we were supposed to have finished. And so I'm wondering when we're doing that.
Well, I'll
That's
tell
our
you,
duty.
it's finished. And we were ready to present it, but we have a person not here. So we'll wait to the next meeting to present it. But
Okay.
it is done.
Okay,
Now, if you want to put your personal,
I'm fine.
you're okay on that. All right. Any other comments?
Just a reminder for the board that the last remaining item is just and only public comment. Meaning there's no other reports or so forth.
Thank you. Thank you. We have, let's see, roughly 16 people wishing to speak, address the board, most of which appears are on the bond. And we talked extensively about the bond issue just now. So,
Can I ask a question on this? The message.
yeah, of course.
I just would like to have clarification. I had a number of parents come to comment on the parent notification that violating board policy was left off the agenda, and they all showed up, wanted to talk about it. They were told, cannot have public comment on something that's not on the agenda. And now we have most of the comments are on the bond, and this was a special study session specific to redistricting. So I would like us to be consistent in how we enforce public comments. And I had mentioned that before as well. We're going to have tons of time to comment publicly. I'm assuming it will be a marathon session in our next board meeting, which is next week.
I share that concern about this getting off on the topic of yes or no on the bond. Doesn't matter. You guys don't get to vote. So that's where we're at.
So the public comments should be aligned around the conversation around attendance boundary realignment. That's what was agendized, and that should be the focus of the comment.
Well, I'd have to go through every single one.
Or could you call the person's name and say, do you want to talk about the boundary realignments? And that's fine, come up and talk. I'm asking this. I'm not telling anybody how to do it.
Can I also just mention, the parents last time weren't even allowed to fill out a card if it said the wrong information, they were told quite specifically, no, you can't do this. You're not allowed to fill out a card. Yet we have 16 cards filled out clearly stating that they're talking about something that's not on the agenda. So I'm disturbed by the process, and it does remind me of not agendizing the issues that have been put out a month ahead of time and then quickly rushing this meeting together. It looks very unprofessional, and I cannot state enough how disappointed I am in how we're running these meetings, the last few meetings that we've had.
Okay, well, if we can get back to the logistics of how we're going to do public comment tonight, perhaps you call each person's name. I'm just suggesting this. Anybody can chime in, call each person's name. If they're going to speak directly to the boundary realignment process, they're welcome to their minutes. If not, they can self-select out. I
Do
don't know
all
how everybody
those-
else feels about that.
Excuse me. Do all those cards say bond as a topic?
Not all.
Do any of them say boundary realignment process?
They say presentation, which is referring to the presentation tonight. Pardon me?
Give people the option to speak or not.
I would say if the card says bond, then clearly just call their name and said it's not an agendized item. We've had so many parents get turned away and just not even given an opportunity and technically we need to look at the board policy all the way around because I don't think we're following board policy on even on that. Because from what I understand, the public actually has a right to talk on most issues on most board meetings. But in this case, it's a study session, which is completely different than a regular board meeting or even a special board meeting. But I think to be fair, what I had mentioned, I think would work best.
Okay.
Mr.
Recognize Mrs.
Mis-
Talasian?
No.
Mr. Diffley,
I'm sorry,
Mr. Diffley,
You can't.
it's,
wait a minute.
it's not,
Not
we
in the study
can't,
session?
this is,
Can't do it.
no, in a special board meeting, and there's the difference is a regular versus a special board meeting. In a regular board meeting, the public may make a public comment on anything that pertains to the jurisdiction of the board. Means things that apply to a school board. If they want to talk about
The
I don't-
speed limit on
so-
Clayton
yeah, the speed
Keene.
limit on Clayton, that is not our business, and you shouldn't be making that comment. That's a regular board meeting, but it's open to anything about a school district. Special board meetings are only, and it doesn't matter if it's a study session or a special board meeting, that part is clear. It must be on the item that's agendized. And so I would encourage, and I would recommend, because I've also watched people and listened to people in this audience not necessarily stay true to those rules, even when it's open, like in a general meeting, people tend to stray on topics. And so I would encourage people to just, at the very, very best, keep your comments focused on the process as was described. That's what I would recommend. And I think Mr. Diffley, you would encourage someone to ask them if they can do that. But I've seen in this meeting where people have been allowed to talk off topic even during special meetings. And it's the responsibility of the board to correct the person or have them, end their comment.
The board president.
The board president, thank you.
Okay, here we go.
Do we have a consensus on whether or not we should just, anyone that says bond could just be set aside and not addressed? If it says specifically bond?
I think we agreed to that.
Okay.
I didn't, but okay.
You
Do we
agree?
need to vote?
We are not going to vote because we don't vote on, we don't add action items to an agenda during the meeting.
Well, it's a process piece.
But we follow board policy and we try to be consistent.
Yeah, it would
I
not be,
would just like each person to be asked, even if they put bond on there, this is just my opinion.
but that would not
Can
be
you speak to
following board
the
policy.
item? And if they're not going to speak to the item, then they self-select out. That's my opinion.
That would be contrary to board policy.
Well, in that case, I'm communicating with the audience. If I'm asking them the question.
Go ahead, Mr. Diffley, proceed.
All right, here we go. Rachel Haida, speaking on the bond or a general subject that we had talked about today, presentation. Thank you. Chris Tomazian. speaking on the presentation?
What I'd like to do is a point of clarification, so please do not start my time. When we were filling out our cards out front, we were told, and there were a number of us out there, that as long as the topic we were talking on was covered in the presentation, was mentioned, that we could talk on it. And quite clearly, the bond was brought up.
Prop 39 and Prop 46 was
The
brought up.
bond was brought up. You talked about bonds. And so that's where most likely a number of people, there was probably a dozen of us out there that heard that information. And the words were, if the topic was something that was discussed during the presentation, ask questions, whatever, we could talk about it.
So
And so that if we were misinformed, that's not the public who wanted to come and talk to you.
Let me ask a question.
That's not,
Was the person officially attached to?
yes, absolutely, yeah.
there's probably one of our
I'm
staff
sorry.
members. There might have been, again, a miscommunication about the process.
And she said she was told to say exactly what she was telling us.
It's fine.
And it is confusing, and I know, and you guys know I was on the board, and it's always nice to hear from your constituents, because a lot of times we sit and no one is here to share their thoughts with us. So that's not a lot of people
So
want to talk.
if, again, apologies for any miscommunication that occurred or misunderstanding. It's not intentional. It was not intended to set someone up or exclude a voice. I think, as everyone knows, these are, as I mentioned before, we have lots of opinions on how to conduct business and so forth. I think in the end, we have the same common goal as to where we're going to have our kids housed and the experiences that they'll have. Mr. Diffley, I think it comes down to you as board president of what you're going to allow. To a certain extent, it is the board president's responsibility, not necessarily in this meeting, but in any meeting when a public comment goes off topic, to correct or to draw a conclusion to that. And so I'll leave it at your discretion how you want to handle this.
Well, as board president, if somebody's represented us saying what you said they said, which I don't doubt you a bit, then I think it's fair and to the point to let everyone speak. Because essentially, we're talking about the board policy as we deal. Get that fly. The fly wasn't invited.
There was one back there too.
Yeah.
Well, then I have an addition to that. So people who did not fill out a card because they thought they could not talk about the bond, could they have an opportunity if they wish to do that now?
Well, if you can quietly and want to do that while we're having the people speak, that's my decision. We have the police here if you want to haul me off.
So should we go back to Rachel and re-ask the question?
I thank you for being generous with listening to your public. That's
All right,
important.
Rachel. For those of you who wish to speak and didn't get to fill out a card, please do so now. Say again. Okay. Chris?
Okay, great, thank you. Well, I'm glad you're back, Mr. Pardue. I do believe that the discussion of redistricting would not be happening tonight if it were not for the denial of the opportunity for the citizens to vote on the bond this coming November. And I did hear you say that your proposal is to vote on it in 2026, but if we were to vote on it and pass it this November, we would have a new school built by 2028 on the property that you all agreed already to purchase. Waiting to pass a bond until 2026 would push that date out to 2030 before a new school could be done. You know, and after hearing the data presented tonight, it is clear to me that following your plan, we will need to begin the school boundary process, and it sounds like we will in just a few months. Then the district will have to go through the school boundary changes process again in the future to accommodate a new site in 2030. You know, I've lived here since 1991 when the population was 20,000. I have personally lived through boundary changes as a parent and a school board member. Not only do students have to change schools, but staff members do also. School boundary changes are not popular. It is chaotic and upsetting to families and staff. Yet, your plan is to put our community through that uncertainty and instability twice in a 5-year period. And let's be clear, you, Mr. Pardue and Ms. Vandergrift, are making this choice for an entire community of 120,000 residents. You could ask for their opinion on this by putting the bond measure on the ballot. What can it hurt to ask our community what they think? Why do you think your vote is more important than our votes? This is not good governance. In accordance with Board Bylaw 9322, I am requesting that the MVUSD Board of Education place the bond measure for the local November election on the agenda for your August 8th meeting for a revote. Thank you. And thank you for letting me speak.
Oh, point of order, Mr. Diffley. Point of order. So since this is a special meeting and the public comments are only on agendized items, and so as board members, we, in that case, would be allowed to respond to things that are said. So is that going to be allowed now, since this is all considered to be on the agenda?
I don't think that's appropriate, and we need to.
So that's a contradiction then. If they're speaking on the agenda, then we should be allowed to respond.
In special board meetings, there's no board comment agendized.
There is. It's agendized right here. Well, okay, there's no board comment, but we're allowed to comment on things that are on the agenda.
No. I disagree. Ellen Larson.
Good evening, and thank you for that presentation. That was very helpful, very informative, and I appreciate it. We moved here, my family moved here in 1989. So my children went to Murrieta schools from November of 89 through June of 2006. When we moved here, my children were supposed to go to Rail Ranch, which was a piece of property. There were no buildings there. So they went to Alta Murrieta Elementary, where there were portable buildings. The Alta Murrieta students were in school from 7 a.m. to 12 p.m. And then the Rail Ranch students arrived at 12 p.m. and went to 5 p.m. We endured that for a year. We endured year-round schedules, boundary changes, portable classrooms, and failed bond measures, all the while knowing that the Board of Education that was seated at that time was working together and doing all they could to provide permanent schools for our community. It's a tragedy to me that this is not the case now. So I would encourage you to please reconsider your position and vote together to place the school bond measure on the ballot in November. Thank you.
Thank you. Tracy Nussbaum. And the subject is boundaries in relation to the bond.
Hi, I'm a mom of 4 in our area. My youngest is 11. And I want to thank you for the presentation, and I want to thank you for putting the push on this, because so many people are coming into our communities wanting to know what the schools are like. And if you have kids in the school district or even just coming down into the area, you know that things are starting to get tight in the area. And you can anticipate which schools we know. I know Lisa J. Mills is at capacity right now. There's a lot to talk about, and I just appreciate this being put out for all of us to see out here and to communicate this in the communities that we live in. I do ask that you pass this bond measure and allow us who vote, who pay taxes in this area, to our kids. But it's just really a great time to kind of sound the alarm that we are having a problem in the next few years, and something needs to be done about it now. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Todd, realignment and boundaries. Whatever relates to what we're talking about.
Hello, I live on the west side of Murrieta, and I have a child in this district for the past 10 years. Regarding redistricting, schools like Cole Canyon have been overpopulated for years, and it negatively impacts the surrounding neighborhood. It seems that by allowing all the transfers for so many years, the district has aided in this problem. Transfers consist of more than just children of teachers. There are kids coming from Lake Elsinore, Wildemar, and Winchester that I am aware of. The district states there are financial burdens that prevent making necessary accommodations to schools. But where has the funding from the 4 active school bonds that taxpayers are currently paying on gone? As a parent, I don't trust the members on this board to spend money in an ethical manner. Let us not forget that during COVID, parents lined this building as far back as the lobby, advocating for our children, and Miss Lunn refused to unmask our kids, stating she was afraid she would be sued and lose her home if she did. That to me is not representative of a public servant and is not putting the students' needs before her own. So Miss Lunn, you can speak out on your campus events you visit, but the truth is when you were pressed on a vitally important issue, you showed your true colors. Ms. Lunn and Ms. Young have both consistently voted against parent rights, but now they want parents to have rights to vote so we can once again financially fund the district. Funny how that works. Our rights apparently matter at your convenience. During a prior meeting, I sat here and listened to both Ms. Young and Ms. Lunn boast about meeting Adam Schiff, one of the most corrupt politicians in this state, and that told me everything I need to know about their integrity. Based on their conduct, I do not trust their decisions to be ethical or trustworthy, nor do I trust either of them to place their public service duties above themselves. I now question everything both Ms. Lunn and Ms. Young support. If redistricting schools is not an ideal option, I would rather have a bond on the ballot in 2026 to build a new school when we hopefully have more members on this board that aren't here to represent Sacramento or the California Teachers Union, and instead will represent students, parents, and the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Robin Christ. Welcome.
Good evening. I do have to say, after being on the board for 13 years up there, it looks a little different from down here. Thank you for allowing me to talk. I'm really troubled, just to start off with, that board members don't want us to vote on a bond and they don't want to hear us speak on it tonight. So that's just very troubling. Sitting on the board for all those years, I wanted input. I wanted their voices. I wanted people to vote on things. So that's just my initial speaking. Anyway, moved here 1993, volunteer for decades in Murrieta, sitting board member here for 13 years, enjoyed every moment of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. While serving on the school board, I was honored and privileged to work beside some of the best board members in the state, some are who are in this room tonight. We had many serious tasks that came before us, and we made decisions that would impact our schools and city for many years. We worked collaboratively. We did it with respect for one another and respect for our roles as elected board members to students, staff, parents, and community at large. We agreed to disagree. That is to be expected. Our meetings were rarely attended by the community. They trusted us to make prudent decisions on behalf of the students in this school district. We had a full plate of important things to do, and we did it under the mandate of understanding, due diligence, and great support from staff. You all have a critical agenda item tonight. The boundary information was spot on. I mean, brought a lot of anxiety back to me because some of us have been through all those changes, but important to have. I appreciate it. This information, depending on the decision made, it will either taint our community for years or give hope that we can move forward and do what is needed for all of our stakeholders, students, staff, businesses, senior citizens, etc. There is a path forward to make this happen, but you must first acknowledge that taking away the rights and freedoms from all voters in our community to weigh in on a bond measure is nothing but disrespectful. There have been previous bond measures that were successful and some that failed, but it was always the will of the people who made that determination. I was a campaign chairman to 2 bond issues, 1998, 2002, and co-chaired of the most recent Measure BB. 3 successful campaigns which built schools, renovated aged facilities, and technology. Our community understood the need to make sure our district continued to provide much needed infrastructure so that our students can have the safest and most enriched learning environment. The least you can do is give the voters the opportunity to approve or disapprove this bond measure. This is why I'm here tonight. I call on you, Mr. Pardue and Ms. Vandergrift, to reconsider your decision to place this bond measure on the ballot. Let's not go back to double sessions and disruptive boundary adjustments in year-round schools. Thank you for this time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Point of order. President Diffley, a point of order. I would have asked this question before if I'd known we were talking about the bond, but since we do have previous board members here, and I do notice on the 2024-25 budget that we just passed, there's a line item, general obligation bonds, and it says a number of years remaining, 27 years, and the principal balance is $178 million. And so I'm just wondering, how is it that we ended up, the board ended up promoting these bonds that we have 27 more years to pay, and we have, I think, about $9 million left to spend on the bonds that we've issued? Is that right?
I don't have, I mean, you have a copy of the budget that you've parsed out there. That obviously is an accurate statement because it's been audited. There are prior bonds that are still being paid upon, right? From Measure BB, there was a remaining balance that has been drawn down for the last projects available to Measure BB. And so I would assume that number would be accurate and the timeline approximated. Yeah.
Thank you. Elijah Dubinsky. Be followed by Robin Nielsen. Welcome.
Hello. So originally, this meeting was called because some people couldn't handle being told no, unprofessionally attempting to target colleagues who disagree. In Diffley's cute little announcement letter for this board meeting, he says how holding off the bond is pushing back the construction of TK through 8th schools, alongside being used supposedly for utilities. With how the bond is written, it will essentially be a blank check to do whatever with, at the expense of the residents. It is the school board's fiduciary duty to make sure the bond is written in the best interest of the Murrieta residents. The board members, Nick and Julie, are doing that. They want the bond to be rewritten in a way that prevents the bond from being used irresponsibly for things such as Coca-Cola desks, which they are getting criticism and hate for by you, Diffley. I'll give you, Linda, Paul, and if she were here, Nancy, the definition of a trustee. An individual person or member of a board given control or powers of administration of property entrusts with a legal obligation to administer it solely for the purposes specified. The behavior and the desire to vote in the bond with its current state shows how poor of a job you 3 are doing as trustees. Another thing, on Diffley's announcement letter, he states how without the bond, it will lead to a program and staff cuts, year-round schooling, and worst of all, vacations might have to be put off. Oh my God, that's terrible. You could translate that to the school district is too lazy to actually have their teachers do their jobs, want easy paychecks, and don't want to properly teach the kids. You're more worried about the school's reputation because it might cause a loss of non-essential programs than the education of the kids. The school board is more worried about the non-essential programs when 50% of the students aren't even at their grade level. Reputation doesn't matter when only 50% of the students are getting that quality education. You're full of lies, Diffley. You're not a conservative. A conservative doesn't like it when bonds are used for any random thing, rather for it to be used for the betterment of the children. which should matter more than reputation. For you to leave it on people my age is disgusting. I'll be 52 by the time it is paid off.
Bob Cowell. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
So proud. I can thank you guys for doing such a piss poor job of educating my children. So I had to do it for you. Let's see. Chris Tomasian asked what it could hurt if the measure went to a vote. I'll tell you why. It's a bad proposal, and the school district could lie like dogs and spend limitless resources to fool the public. That's why. Also, as my son said, the members of the school board are called trustees. That means you are representing the taxpayers of Murrieta against the school district from pulling their shenanigans as they are doing with this proposed bond tax. The employees of the school district do not always live in the city, so they're not concerned about where the money comes from. The school board's fiduciary duty is to represent the needs of all residents, not just the ones who use the public schools. I want to thank Julie Vandergriff and Nick Pardue for doing their fiduciary duty. I'm against this bond, period. This district overspends and the employees make way more money than they deserve. Test scores are pathetic. All it takes to get a high school diploma in this district is for a child to warm a seat. The district doesn't care if that child can read, write, or do basic math. After all, once they graduate, they're not the district's responsibility. As a matter of fact, they don't even need to graduate. They just need to age out. But I received no benefit from this school district because I wanted my children to actually learn. But after fighting Darren Daniel in the district and you, Paul Diffley, I gave up and did your job. But I think that this board, would vote for a bond tax that was written more responsibly. So I'm asking you, Paul Diffley, Linda Loon, and Nancy Young to do your fiduciary duty and properly represent the residents of Murrieta by requiring the district to write a better bond tax proposal.
Bob Cowell, welcome.
Yes, thank you. Okay, it is not democratic for any board to put a bond on the ballot if the funding to support the bond comes from the school district that could spend the millions of taxpayer dollars to support the bond. The resolution includes a clause in there so that this bond money is spent to fund to make this bond happen. So you could spend millions on it. Resistance against the bond would have to come from the same taxpayers using activist techniques. If this bond passes, the bond's resolutions will allow the school district to get paid back from the money from the bond. This is not right. It's not democracy. It is tyranny. It's not freedom. Proposition 39, passed in 2000, requires that the bond needs to provide for a comprehensive list of expenditures to go on the ballot and pass by 55%. If it doesn't have a comprehensive list, which it does not, it has to be a 2/3 threshold according to the law. With a projected budget of $367 million for next school year, 87% of this money goes to salaries and benefits. That is about $3,000 for every man, woman, and child within the district. With the present funding, students are failing in math, reading, writing, and that is with the bonds that are now in place. Government is always expanding and will keep expanding until the people just say no. The schools need to cut the fat and address the problems of basic skills for the students. We need to starve the beast. One of the things I want to also say is I grew up in Alhambra, six miles from downtown Los Angeles. We were built out when I was a child. So we had 50,000 people in the district. We had 3,000 kids in one high school, and there's still one high school. There's over 100,000 people that live in ADUs and within the district. We still have just one high school. And we only have the same number. There's no place to build anymore. And the kids will not be able to live there. They have to move from there because the cost of living is so expensive. Living in an ADU is not a place to raise a child. When you have all these little apartment buildings being built around here, it's no place to raise a kid. All the families will be leaving here and going someplace where they can. Thank you.
Thank you. Pam Diffley.
Sorry about the sunglasses, left my other glasses at home. This is a difficult group of people here. You got the pros and the pros and the cons. I want you to know that I am on the side of Chris Tomazian, Ellen Larson, and Robin Christ. We need another bond. Now, we don't have to spend all that bond right now, but we need it because it will have to take care of us for another 20 years. And I've taught for 45 years, so I know something about how it goes in a classroom. If you don't have parents that will help you learn, then yeah, you may not have children that learn. It's not just the kid going to school and that's the end of it all. Anyway, I taught at Barnhart School in Arcadia. I taught at Lake Elsinore School, public school. Barnhart was private. I remember the track system here. If we don't pass the bond, we could be back to the 1990s all over again. We moved here in 1997. I worked D track, and our daughter was on B track at Murrieta Valley High School. And yes, we didn't have the same vacation time. Oh, poor me. Well, I did get through it, but I hated it. It's not fair for a child not to be able to go on a vacation with their parents. We only had one high school. We didn't have vacations together. It could have been that we had, like Ellen was talking about, morning, you go to school from 7 to 12 and then 12 to 5. That could happen if we have a problem like this, if we don't have enough. Now, I appreciate the fact that we did have these nice women and men and women here explaining about the districting, and that could happen, but we don't know. We need to prepare for the future just in case. And as far as Paul Diffley goes, I would trust him with my life. And do. So, as far as I'm concerned, Julie Vandegrift, you had some questions. And Nick, you had some questions. I appreciate both of them. But I think that we absolutely have to have this bond issue in place so that if something should happen and we absolutely do have 1.5 children in each apartment house come, then we will need to have a place for these kids to be educated. Please put the bond measure back on the ballot.
Can I ask you a comment?
Mr. Perdue, could I have your attention, please? Thank you. First of all,
Sorry, this is Casson Klein. Casson.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I probably mispronounced it. Excuse me.
I'm sorry, say it again, Mr. Diffley.
I said, I'm sorry that I may have mispronounced
No,
it.
it's okay. It's okay. First of all, thank you very much. I appreciate the work that staff has done. My family moved here in 1983. I moved my family here in 2000. My parents moved here in 83. So I've seen Murrieta grow, and I've appreciated the quality of life that we all benefit from. And the school district is an invaluable part of that. You know, Mr. Difflin, when you opened the meeting, you talked about the flag. And one of the things that that flag represents is two of the greatest freedoms that we have: the ability to come and speak and our ability to vote. So it's also the input that we have here for the boundary adjustment, which is, we're very privileged to be able to do that. And unfortunately, we haven't talked about that cascade effect that will have on the rest of the city and that quality of life. Those are my comments about the boundary. Since we're allowed to talk about the bond, I'll turn my attention to that. I previously served as a planning commissioner in the city of Murrieta, and I currently serve as a trustee on the Murrieta Valley Cemetery District. As one of those officials, if you will, I'm often faced with decisions on policies that run contrary to my own personal beliefs. And so with that, I would respectfully ask for you to reconsider your position on allowing your residents, the people that you represent, the ability to vote on a bond or not. Thank you very much. I appreciate your attention, sir. Thank you.
Jack Guerrero. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jack Guerrero. I'm a community activist and a taxpayer advocate. Just a brief comment on today's agenda item regarding housing developments and their impact on boundary realignment. I appreciated the detail in today's presentation and would encourage a more thoughtful evaluation of this information in the future. The consultant today referenced 25 weeks as the amount of time that would take to complete the analysis, and the demographic projections are going to take at least that long to clearly refine. We have simply way too many demographic uncertainties, and my point today is simply that we should not rush into an irreversible policy prescription prematurely. And we have safety valves, ladies and gentlemen. We learned today from the consultant that we have 12% enrollment that is out of the district. That is a safety valve or a safety spigot, as it were, that can be adjusted to give us a little more breathing room. We have total utilization in this district of 77% and will not be targeted to breach 100% until the year 2031 for selected schools. The point is that we have a little bit of breathing room. Now, as it relates to the bond, when we get more reliable data in 2026 or beyond, then we might reconsider the bond measure. As mentioned at previous meetings, the bond measure contemplated for 2024, which was already voted down, lacks any thoughtful analysis or prioritization of projects, which is the legal requirement, by the way, much less specific timelines and budgets. And I think today's presentation provides even more reason to hold off on any bond discussion this year. Let's defer the bond measure until such time that economic conditions are stabilized, interest rates have begun to come down, government budgets at all levels are better understood, the taxpayers get a little bit of reprieve from burdensome taxation, and you can do your homework with better and more thoughtful analysis, including impacts we previewed today of housing development projects and timelines on school construction needs. I have not asked you to kill this. I have asked you to defer consideration to a more reasonable cycle in the future. The bar would still be very high, make no mistake about that, to justify and ultimately approve such a measure. But you would have a reasonable head start, 2 years at least, to meet the legal standard for detail and analysis, including the topics raised in today's meeting, to provide assurances that funds will be directed only to student facilities as geographically prioritized in a detailed project plan, and to commit to airtight accountability measures to prevent fraud, waste, cost overruns, conflicts of interest, and redirection schemes to cover salaries and overhead costs and other abuse. Thank you very much.
Emily Brooks. Welcome.
Hi, good evening. So I came here tonight to talk about the elephant in the room. This is a proverbial elephant. African proverb, you've got a whole bunch of people blindfolded feeling different parts of an elephant. One person feels the trunk and they feel it all raspy and crinkly and it bends, and someone else is touching the foot. the leg of the elephant, and they say, no, no, this is really strong, and then someone's flapping the tail and someone's feeling the ears. We're all dealing with the same problem, but we're coming at it from different approaches. And what I would challenge all of the board members to do is to take a step back and look at the problem and find a way to solve it together, because this kind of arguing, these meetings week after week, bringing the community in, having folks on one side ranting and raving about one thing and folks on the other yelling about another, criticizing individual board members who are here working diligently, some for decades, years on the board, night after night, day after day, going into the community and serving their constituents. To devolve into something like this is kind of ridiculous. I would like to see Murrieta Valley back in the news for the excellence, for students who are excelling, national merit scholars and football teams that win and cheerleading, all of those things. That's why Murrieta Valley should be in the news, not because of one more crazy board meeting that makes it onto national news and all the talk channels, and then people are going out making their own videos and talking about it. So please take tonight as a learning opportunity to step back, look at that elephant together with wide open eyes and say, what can I do to make this district better? Maybe our ultimate goals are different. You might have your values, you might have yours, conservatives and liberals and folks who maybe aren't that fond of the public school system, but you've got one set of constituents to serve. There are 22,000 students in this school. They're gonna walk into the classrooms in about 2 weeks. I know my son's got orientation next week. He's picking up a schedule at Murrieta Valley High School. I would like for this coming year to be one in which all of you and all of us as well as parents and community members and taxpayers work together truly to make our schools better, because coming here and arguing with each other like this is not going to do it. I was at the meeting last week, and afterwards I spoke with Mr. Pardue for quite a while. I heard where he's coming from. I don't agree with all of it, but we're willing to talk. I also stayed after and spoke with several parents for quite a while. And even though we're on opposite sides politically, possibly, we found common ground. And if we can do that, I challenge all of you to do that as well. And so I think, especially Dr. Andrews, all the work you're doing holding these folks together, it is seen and it is appreciated. And for all of you for your time and your service, I thank you. And please, let's do better.
The last speaker, Greg Langworthy. There you are.
So on my comment card, I just put Dr. Andrews' presentation. So one of the first things he said was what unites us. And that's what I'd like to focus on, because one of the things that we do before every board meeting, and very happy to do this, is say the pledge. And we pledge to the flag, one nation under God, but also to the republic for which it stands. And the Republican system is where we elect representatives to resolve our disagreements. And so we may have very vigorous disagreements, but the way that a republic works is we have representatives, they get in there, they get the details, and they hear all this commentary from all of us, but then they finally have to vote. And that's maybe where I would disagree here, is that there was a vote, and the vote has to be under the rules, under the rule of law. It's just like a basketball game. You got certain rules, you got to play by the rules. And at the end of the day, that's what makes it fair. And maybe you disagree with the outcome, but that was how the outcome turned out. So I think that that would be my, so one of the great things about our nation is that we can have vigorous disagreements, but because we're one nation under God, we're all created equal, we're all deserving of respect, we're all deserving of being listened to, and then we have disagreements, but we've got a process, and that process in a republic is electing representatives to resolve our disputes. We vote, win or lose, we go home, and we remain peaceful and friendly. So hopefully that is what you guys are modeling. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We've come to the end of the comment session. Thank you all for coming. Ravi? Oh, I'm sorry. Come up.
Oh, there's another comment.
Welcome.
Everyone, and thank you for letting me speak. It is pretty clear from Mr. Pardue's statements tonight that he is not going to change his mind. It is my opinion that both trustees are retaliating, both trustees, that would mean Mr. Pardue and Ms. Vandergrift, for not getting their way on all of the parental rights issues that have come before the board in the past year. It also may be true that Mr. Pardue and Ms. Vandergrift have a great dependence on Bob Cowell to support their future political campaigns. I would like to talk about an elephant in the room named Mitra, which I had never heard about before, but Mitra is definitely influencing a lot of people in this room. As far as I know, Mitra bankrupted the political campaigns of both Vandergrift and Pardue. They are beholden to him. I recently learned about Mitra, and Bob Cowell is their president. This is going on about what's influencing you. It is the bond. This is why you're not voting for the bond.
Please.
You don't want
I'd like to speak to
this.
this.
Is why
Hold
you're
on
not
about
voting
the
for the
bond.
bond, and this is
No
the elephant
cars,
in the room.
Off topic, and then we gavel one set, just like we silence one set in one meeting, and then we just completely allow another side. We need to have policies. We need to follow them.
It's so off topic. I don't even know who this Mitra.
It is
person
not off top. Mitra, Mitra supported your campaign as a candidate. It's on Google, at least, that he supported both you and Mr. Vandergrift. He has deep pockets. He threatened Mr. Diffley at a couple board meetings ago, saying that he didn't vote the way he wanted, he would retaliate. So I know there are caring. Huh? You did threaten Mr. Diffley. You did
Mr.
threaten
Cowell,
him.
please.
Mr. Cowell considers the public school system broken and has even stated in writing that he would like to defund the schools. This is the caliber of person these two trustees have chosen to associate with. I'm just about as old as this guy, and decimating the school district would be your legacy. If I were you, I'd pick something else to focus on that's more positive. It is my opinion that Mr. Pardue and Ms. Vandergrift schemed to vote down this bond measure. Their sudden decision to not support the bond is a malicious gotcha action that they enjoy. They want to financially cripple this district. Mr. Pardue claims his constituents would not support the bond issue. I don't buy that explanation because the bond tax is approximately $156 a year for most households. That's a small price to pay to maintain this exceptional school district. In conclusion, what we have here are two trustees blatantly failing in their fiduciary duties.
They took all of her
Thank you.
Point of order, I just want to respond since I didn't have a chance, since we didn't know we were talking about the bond. But when we're talking about, putting the district in bad financial condition, and I just would like to advocate for our community who now has 27 more years remaining to pay $178 million, money of which has been drawn down to $9 million. And so I think that it's very unfair to try to say that the board members are trying to bankrupt the district or whatever. We are trying to protect our neighbors and our friends.
Thank you. We're adjourned. Thank you for coming. We're glad to have everyone.